The greatest con ever run, a blacktail. We're sitting in a hotel bar, you and me. It's late, the kind of late where the bartender has stopped pretending to be busy and is just standing at the far end polishing the same glass he's been polishing for 20 minutes. He's not cleaning it, he's performing patience the way people do when they think they're part of someone else's story. Don't worry about him, he's not in this one. There's jazz on the speakers, something with a piano that knows how to be quiet. The ice in your drink has melted, you haven't noticed. I'm the one who sat down next to you an hour ago and said, "You look like someone who appreciates a good story." And you, because you're the kind of person who stays in hotel bars past midnight, which means you're either running from something or towards something, and either way, you're exactly the right audience. You said, "Try me." So I'm trying you. 3 things before I start, and I need you to hear all 3 because one of them is the key to everything that happens next. First, everything I'm about to tell you is true. Every name, every number. I won't lie to you once. Second, I am a con artist, or I was. The distance between those 2 words is the reason I'm in this bar tonight instead of running the next job. Third, and listen to this one carefully because later you're going to wish you had. A con doesn't work on the person who knows they're inside one. It only works on the person who's certain they're outside it. I just told you what I am, and right now, in this moment, you feel like you know what's coming, like you're ahead of me, like you're the one watching the trick. That feeling is the trick, but we'll get to that. Step 1 of any con, the profile. Before you approach, you study, you learn what the mark carries, what they need, what they defend, and most importantly, the gap between who they are and who they believe they are. That gap is the only door you'll ever need. The target was a man named Solomon Pace. 63, built a pharmaceutical empire from a single patent he'd acquired in 1974. And acquired is doing more work in that sentence than any word should have to. His research partner was a woman named Chen, the actual mind behind the compound. Catherine died in a single-car accident on Route 9 outside Poughkeepsie on a Tuesday in November. The coroner ruled mechanical failure. The coroner retired to Bermuda the following spring. Pace filed the patent 11 days after the funeral. I know what you're thinking. Why not go to the police, go to the press, drag it into the light? My mother tried. She wrote 11 letters, district attorney, journalists, Catherine's family. I found them years later in a shoebox under her bed, each one with a response clipped to it or no response at all, which was its own kind of answer, without physical evidence, without a witness, without anything beyond the grief of a former roommate. There was no case, no story. The system was already his. He'd built it the same way he built everything. Carefully, patiently, with enough distance between himself and what he'd done that no one on the outside could see the frame. If you wanted to reach Solomon Pace, you had to go through the walls. I know about Chen because my mother told me about her. I need to tell you this now. Not later, not at the end, because if I save it for a reveal, it becomes a twist. And this isn't a twist, this is the foundation. My mother and Catherine shared an apartment in New Haven for 2 years. Graduate school. My mother was in literature, Catherine was in biochemistry. They lived on ramen and library coffee and the particular intimacy of 2 women in their 20s sharing a bathroom and a belief that the world would reward them for being brilliant. My mother was at the funeral. She sat in the 3rd row. She watched Solomon Pace deliver the eulogy, watched him weep for a woman whose life's work he had already filed a claim on. And she said his grief was real. That was a part she couldn't forgive. The grief was real and the theft was real, and he held both of them in the same body, and neither one made the other untrue. She told me this when I was 14. We were in the kitchen of our apartment in Bed-Stuy. She was making soup. The stove light was on, but the overhead wasn't, so the room was mostly shadow, and the steam from the pot was catching the light in a way that made it look alive. She wasn't looking at me, she was looking at the steam. Some people carry what they've done the way a building carries its frame, she said. It's invisible. You can't see it from the outside, but every wall, every floor, every window, all of it hangs on the frame. And the frame is the thing they did. Take it out and the building comes down. Then she looked at me and her face did something I'd only seen once before, the morning she told me my father wasn't coming back. Don't ever let someone build a building on top of you, baby, and don't ever build one on top of someone else. I was 14, I didn't understand all of it, but I understood the steam, I understood her face, and I understood that Catherine Chen was a real woman who had been real in my mother's life, but not a story, not a case study, not a cautionary tale, a person, a friend who laughed in a specific way and burned toast on Sunday mornings and had trusted the wrong man with the thing she cared about most. I've carried that kitchen for 30 years, the shadow, the steam, just the light catching something you couldn't hold, and everything I've done since started there. My mother is alive. She lives in Baltimore now, thinks I'm in consulting strategic communications, which is the kind of phrase that means nothing specific enough to question. She calls every Sunday at 4. I answer every Sunday at 4. She asks how I am. I say fine. She says fine back. The way only she can, testing the weight of it, listening for what's behind it. We both know, we both pretend we don't. She did something once. I was 19, just before I left for good. She found a roll of cash in my jacket pocket. $800. I'd earned it running a card game in Flatbush, but she didn't know that. She held it up and didn't ask where it came from. She put it on the kitchen table between us and said, I didn't raise you to be the kind of man who can't look at where things come from. And then she put the money back in my pocket. She put it back. She needed it. I know she needed it. And she put it back. And the look on her face wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was the look of a woman who had already decided which version of her son she was going to believe in. And the decision was costing her something she would never say out loud. Some doors don't need to be broken into, just open. My mother's door has been open my entire life. That's the one I've never been able to walk through. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and I'm getting ahead of a woman named Renata, and you haven't met Renata yet. You will. You just looked at my hands. I noticed you're reading me the same way I'm reading you. Good. But look at them again. They're steady. They've always been steady. That's the gift and the cost of being a ghost. Your hands never shake because the shaking happens somewhere else, somewhere deeper, somewhere the room can't see. The ghost sees everything, touches nothing. Also eats cold takeout, standing over a sink at 2 a.m., arguing with himself about whether invisibility counts as a lifestyle or a diagnosis. It's glamorous work. We'll come back to that. Let me tell you about the team. The team was 3, a locksmith, a mirror, and a ghost. Sounds like the setup to a joke. In a way it was. We just didn't find out who the punchline was until the end. Dara was the locksmith. I'll show you how she worked. Chicago, a restaurant, red leather booths, candles in wine bottles. We were assessing a potential mark, but Dara wasn't watching the mark. She was watching our waitress. She's about to quit, Dara said, tonight, after this shift. How do you know? Letter in her apron pocket. I can see the fold through the fabric. She's been touching it every time she passes the manager. Confirmation touching, the way you touch your passport at the airport, like making sure the exit is still there. I looked at the waitress, smiling, refilling coffees, perfectly normal surface. The couple by the window, Dara continued, like, both married, not to each other, watch the menus, and when you're comfortable, you share. When you're hiding, you each hold your own. 2 separate menus, 2 performances. 30 seconds from across a room, without speaking to anyone. That was Dara. She didn't read people, she translated them, as if every person were a text written in a language only she was fluent in. I asked her once, this was years later after a job in Montreal after too much wine, which for Dara meant a glass and a half. I asked her if she could turn it off, the reading, the translating. She looked at me the way she looked at everyone, like she was finding the letter in the apron pocket. Can you stop hearing music once you know what a melody is? I laughed. She didn't. I was married, she said, for 3 years. He was a good man, patient, sincere, and every time he told me he loved me, I could see the micro expression that preceded it, the tiny rehearsal, the half second, where he chose the words before he said them, and the choosing was genuine, the love was genuine. But I couldn't stop seeing the mechanism, I couldn't stop translating him. She finished her wine. He didn't leave because I saw too much. He left because he could feel me seeing it, and no one wants to be translated in their own bed. That was the only time Dara ever told me something real. And it was the moment I understood that her gift was the same shape as mine, a door that only opens in one direction. Eli was the mirror's job, show the mark, the version of themselves they most want to see, and then make that version feel, for the first time, truly understood. I'll tell you about Eli by telling you about the night he met Pace. Charity Gala, Midtown Manhattan, black tie, 400 guests orbiting Solomon Pace like planets around a star that's burning from the inside out. Eli arrived in a Tom Ford, charcoal, single-breasted. That didn't say, "Look at me." It said, "I've always been here." He represented a Zurich investment group, fictional in substance, flawless in surface. He didn't approach Pace. He spent the first hour being fascinating to everyone in earshot. A biotech fund, 40% annual returns, not accepting new investors, said to other people, but loudly enough, always loudly enough. At 10:14 p.m., Pace crossed the room. He didn't walk, he gravitated. "Tell me about this fund." Eli hesitated 2 seconds, then lowering his voice. "I probably shouldn't." 3 words, and with those 3 words, public information became a secret. A secret shared became a bond, and Pace, who needed to know things others couldn't, who needed to be the one who saw, leaned in. I was watching from across the room. Waiter's jacket, champagne tray, invisible. They talked for 40 minutes. Eli asked real questions, listened, genuinely listened with the full attention of a surgeon examining the thing he's about to remove. By 11, Pace was hooked. He'd done it to himself. The door was on his side. He turned the knob. This is where the ghost works. I built the fund from the feeling backward to the surface. You start with the emotion, exclusivity, validation, the pleasure of being chosen. Then you reverse engineer every document, every surface, every detail to produce that emotion. Performance records, board members who existed exactly enough to pass a search. A website that's loaded in 1.2 seconds because Pace was the kind of man who noticed. It was beautiful. The way a movie set is beautiful. Perfect from every angle the camera sees. Hollow from every angle it doesn't. Building a con is lonely, not the loneliness of crime, the loneliness of building something beautiful and knowing the person walking through it is going to feel awe and trust and belonging, and knowing you built all of that and you can never stand inside it in 20 years, and I have been alone in every single one. But not all of those 20 years were elegant, and this is where Renata comes in. Renata, 7 years ago, widow, mid-60s, more money than she had people around her who weren't trying to take it. She said it once at dinner. The price of being comfortable is never knowing if someone is sitting across from you because of you or because of what you represent. She said it lightly, the way people say heavy things when they've been carrying them too long to feel the weight. She ordered the Dover sole that night. I don't know why I remember that. I remember everything else for a reason, because it mattered to the job, because it fit the profile, because it was useful. The Dover sole wasn't useful. She just liked fish. I built her a room that felt like friendship, took $400,000. She didn't report it, didn't call the police, didn't hire a lawyer. And when I finally understood why, it was worse than any of those things. She didn't report it because reporting it would mean admitting that the friendship was never real. And losing $400,000 was less painful than losing the belief that someone had once sat across from her because of her, the same hands, the same technique. And sometimes the room I built set someone free, and sometimes it just left them standing in the rubble of the last thing they'd believed in. But here's the thing I still can't answer, and I've tried. During those months before I took the money, Renata laughed more. She called her sister for the first time in a decade. She started going to the museum on Thursdays because I told her I loved Hopper and she wanted to see what I saw in him. The friendship was a con. But was everything she felt inside it a con too? If you build a room that isn't real, but the person standing in it feels something that is, what have you actually done? I don't know. I took the money and I left, and I don't know. I carry Renata. She's the face that rises whenever I try to tell myself the clean version of this story. The commitment was scheduled for a Thursday, $12 million, wire transfer to Zurich, and on Wednesday night, the con fell apart. Eli called me at 2 a.m. His voice was different, stripped of the polish, stripped of the performance, raw in a way I'd never heard from a man who performed for a living. Pace knows, he said. Knows what? He knows about Catherine. My blood went cold, a physical sensation, a temperature drop in my chest, as if someone had opened a window in a room I thought was sealed. How? He's had me followed, all of us. Private security firm, 3 weeks. They traced Dara back to Chicago, me to 2 prior aliases, and you. He stopped. They traced you to your mother, Cash. He knows she was Catherine's roommate. He knows this is personal. The room I was standing in, a studio apartment in the East Village, went small. The walls moved 2 inches closer. The air thickened. 20 years of being invisible, and Solomon Pace had looked through the wall and seen me. Because I'd made the one mistake a ghost can never make, I'd taken a job that mattered to me. And feeling is the one frequency that makes a ghost visible. I called Dara. She answered on the first ring. She always answered on the first ring. Dara didn't sleep during active operations the way normal people didn't breathe underwater. I know, she said. Eli called me. I've already figured out what we do. We abort, we pull. No, we accelerate. Eli's voice from behind me. I hadn't heard him come in. He has our names, Dara. He has our faces. He has Cash's mother's address. This isn't a job anymore. So leave, Dara said. Maybe I will. Then leave, but hear this first. The reason Pace hired that firm wasn't because he suspected a con. It was because the fund was working too well. He was doing due diligence on something he already wanted to be true. And what he found instead was us. Pace has never conceded a position in his life. In 2003, a whistleblower filed a wrongful termination suit, settlement offer $140,000. Pace spent $11 million fighting it. $11 million to avoid paying $140,000. Fired 2 of his own lawyers for suggesting he settle. One on a technicality, called it vindication. Eli was by the door, coat on, half in, half out. He's going to wire the money, Dara said. He's going to wire it knowing the fund is a con. Because right now at 2 a.m., Pace is telling himself, I know I'm being conned. Which means I'm no longer the mark. I'm the one who sees. He'll wire the money and come after it on his own terms. He'll tell himself he's the predator now. And we let him believe that. We let him believe it because it's the last thing he'll ever need to believe. Eli was still by the door, but he wasn't holding the knob anymore. This is insane, he said, but he said it the way people say things when they've already decided it. Dara saw it. Don't look at me like that. I'm not brave. I just did the math. The math says we go. Eli looked at me. Cash? My mother's kitchen, the steam, the stove light catching it. We go, I said. Eli took off his coat. Thursday, Pace wired $12 million. He wired it knowing, he wired it believing he was ahead. He wired it because his profile demanded it, because he'd spent $11 million in 2003 to avoid the physical sensation of concession. The smartest man in the room doesn't flinch. The money moved through Zurich, the Caymans. 7 shell companies nested like Russian dolls, and it arrived in a place that within 48 hours would no longer exist. The best lock is always the one the mark installs on his own cage. Friday morning I got a call from Mrs. Okafor, my mother's neighbor. Someone had been to the apartment, a man with a clipboard. How long has she lived here? Does she live alone? Does she have a son? I was in a cab in 11 minutes. Running up the stairs of a building I hadn't entered in 6 years, 3rd floor, the door was locked. My mother was at work, nothing taken, nothing disturbed. But the deadbolt had been tested, fresh scratches around the plate, tiny bright lines in the brass where someone had pressed a tension wrench and thought better of it. I stood in that kitchen, the same kitchen. The stove was different. She'd replaced it years ago, and but the light from the window fell the same way, the same angle, on the same patch of floor where she'd stood making soup while she told me about Catherine. And for the first time in 20 years, I was not the ghost in someone else's room. I was the mark in my own. Standing in the place where everything started, feeling the walls close the way I'd made walls close around 100 people in 100 cities. The shape of what you put into the world comes back, not as punishment, as echo. And you don't recognize it until you're standing inside it. Now, I moved my mother to Baltimore that night, told her renovation, pipes. She asked 4 times. She knew I was lying. My mother has always known when I'm lying, which is its own kind of irony for a man who made lying a profession. But she went. 3 weeks later, I received a handwritten letter from Solomon Pace. It was not a threat, it was not a demand, it was a thank you note. The handwriting changed 3 times in 4 pages. It started careful. The penmanship of a man who writes checks and contracts, everything measured. By the 2nd page, the letters were larger, looser. By the 3rd page, there were words crossed out, sentences that started and stopped. The pen pressed harder in places. You could feel the indentations on the back of the page, like someone leaning their full weight into the act of trying to say something they never said. I know what you did, I don't know how and I don't know who, but I do. I knew before the wire. I told myself I was managing the situation, controlling it, be the one who that line stopped. No period, just a gap. I was not managing anything. I think I knew that too. There is a thing I have not told anyone, not my wives, not my lawyers, not the another stop. I have not slept through the night since Catherine died. 31 years, every night, the television stays on. I need the noise because silence is 3 heavy lines through whatever word he'd first chosen. I cannot be in a quiet room. I have not been in a quiet room in 31 years. I filled them all. Furniture and people and noise and accomplishment. So much accomplishment because accomplishment is loud. It keeps the quiet out. Last night I slept 8 hours. The television was off. I didn't turn it off. It broke, I think. But I woke up in silence and the silence was... He tried 3 words. I could see the ghosts of each one beneath the crossouts, the one he settled on. Survivable, the silence was survivable, and that is the first true thing that has happened to me since Catherine. Whatever you took from me, I don't mean the money, I mean the other thing, the thing underneath it, you took that. The last paragraph was the steadiest, as if he'd found something on the other side of all that reaching. I am sitting in a room with no television and it is quiet and I am not going to die. That is all I know right now. I'm not going to die and the quiet has been here the whole time and I was the one keeping it out. I was the lock. The cage was me. And someone broke the lock. And I am terrified. And I think I am grateful. And I don't know what to do next except sit here. No closing, no signature, just the end of the paper. I've wondered since then whether the letter was real. Whether a man like Pace, a man who spent $11 million to avoid the word settle, could actually write something that vulnerable. Whether the whole thing was his own con, running in the other direction. Some nights I believe every word. Other nights I think the only person who could build a room that convincing is someone who learned architecture at the same place I did. But it doesn't matter because what happened to me in that coffee shop was real regardless of what was happening to him in his study. The letter did what it did, whatever he meant by it. The crack it opened in me was mine. I read that letter in a coffee shop on Atlantic Avenue. It was raining. The window had condensation on it and someone had drawn a circle in the moisture with their finger. A small circle already dissolving, the edges blurring as the water reclaimed it. I read the letter 6 times. And then something happened that I did not expect and could not control, and that broke the mechanism I'd been living inside for 20 years. I cried. No, wait, not the way people cry in movies. I cried the way a pipe bursts, all at once, without dignity. The coffee shop was mostly empty, and I sat there with my hands on the table and my shoulders shaking, and I made sounds I hadn't made since I was 14 years old, watching my mother look at steam. I wasn't a thief. I had never been a thief. Every con I'd run, every fund, every approach, every room had the same thing underneath it. I found people who were carrying something sealed, and I took from them in a way that cracked the seal. The money was never the score. The crack was the score. The air was the score. I could open anyone's cage except my own. And then Renata's face, right there between one breath and the next, because the revelation wasn't clean. If the crack was always the real score, then what I did to Renata wasn't liberation. I reached for her sealed room, and what I found wasn't a cage. It was the last wall between her and the loneliness she'd already been fighting. And I left her with less. I sat with that, both things true at once, the way Pace held grief and theft at Catherine's funeral, the way my mother held love and helplessness in the same kitchen, the way I held the healer and the thief in the same pair of hands. My hands were shaking for the first time in 20 years, and I let them. They shook with 30 years of unfelt feeling, and I sat there and let the pipe burst and didn't try to fix it. That was the last day of the con. That was the day the ghost became a person. 6 months later, I got a postcard. No return address, just coordinates. A fishing village on the coast of Portugal, a place Dara had mentioned once, years ago, in the back of a car after a job in Chicago. If I ever stop, that's where I'll open a bakery. I thought she was joking. The idea of Dara stopping was like a clock deciding not to tick. I'll never verify whether the bakery exists. Some doors you leave closed because the fact of them is enough. Eli I saw 2 years later, his face on a billboard, real estate. His real name, the one I'd heard only once in a hotel room before the Pace job when he was too tired to perform. We'd been sitting on opposite beds, still in our clothes. The minibar opened between us like a negotiation table, and he told me, quietly, the way you say things at 3 a.m. that you deny at noon, that he'd been engaged once before all this, that she'd said he was the most attentive listener she'd ever met, and then she'd said, but I can never tell if you're listening to me or studying me, and I don't think you can tell the difference either. He'd stopped being a mirror. I pulled up his number, stared at it, didn't call. Some things you break apart and they don't go back together the same way, and that's not failure. That's just the shape of what happened. Now, I told you 3 things at the beginning. Everything is true. I am, or was, a con artist, and a con only works on the person who's certain they're outside it. I also told you I wouldn't lie to you once, and I haven't. Every description I used, a man who carries something he doesn't discuss, who fills every room to keep one specific silence out, who has sealing something shut for longer than he can remember. I was describing Pace, but you already know I wasn't only describing Pace. I'm going to leave, but not the way I used to. Disappearing while you're looking at the place where I was standing. I'm going to stand up and put on my coat and look at you, and you're going to see my face. Not the ghost's. Mine. The one with the shaking hands, and the kitchen and 20 years of rooms I can't unfurnish. And a woman named Renata I can't repay, and a mother whose door has been open my entire life. Finish your drink, go home, and if something stirred while you were listening, in a place you don't have a name for, in a room you sealed so long ago you forgot it was a room, that wasn't me, that was yours. It was there before I sat down. It will be there after I leave. The question was never whether to let it in. The air was always coming. I just got here first.